was a perfect day for flying with calm weather and clear skies. And in the early morning, a Ryanair flight was on its routine path from Frankfurt to Ciampino, under the command of an experienced captain. He flew the entire 1 hour and 50-minute flight smoothly without any incidents. But the moment the plane was about to land, a huge flock of birds crashed into them dangerously. As the landing procedure was hugely disturbed, the captain aborted it and chose to go around, which is the most normal and recommended procedure in aviation. But turns out, exactly that's what led the plane to a disaster and almost killed 172 souls on board. But how is it possible? How come the maneuver designed to save lives led to a disaster? The investigators jumped in quickly, and what they found out is unbelievable. This is the story of Ryanair Flight 4102, a deadly incident that probably opened a new window in aviation. The story starts on November 10th, 2008. Ryanair Flight 4102 takes off from Frankfurt in Germany, carrying 166 passengers with 6 crew members. It's heading to Ciampino Airport in Rome for just a less than 2-hour flight. And let me make this clear. The aircraft, Boeing 737-800, is in perfect condition because it came out of the factory just 8 months ago. Rather, what's interesting in this flight is in the cockpit, because the 2 pilots are very different. The captain is 44 years old and Belgian. He is highly experienced, with almost 10,000 flight hours. More than half of those hours are on this exact model of aircraft. He has flown through bad weather, handled difficult landings, and dealt with all kinds of situations. For him, this plane is almost like an extension of his body. But sitting next to him is the first officer, who's just 23, Dutch, and joined Ryanair just 6 months earlier. His total flight time is around 600 hours, with about 400 on the Boeing 737. But in aviation, that's very little experience. But that's not concerning at all, because the weather is good and the sky is clear, which makes it basically just another routine Ryanair trip in the early morning. What's concerning is that sometimes the difference between a normal day and a disaster is just a tiny moment that no one expects, and this flight is about to experience that soon. Everything stays routine during the takeoff, climbing, and cruising until around 7:20 in the morning, local time, when the crew starts descending toward Rome. The first officer starts his approach briefing, talking it through like he has done 100 times before. The weather can't be more perfect with clear skies, calm wind, and great visibility. As they pass 17,000 feet, the captain does something nice. He knows the first officer is still learning, so he offers him the manual controls for the rest of the approach. The first officer is happy to take it. This is exactly the kind of chance young pilots wait for. And honestly, the approach is beautiful. The tower clears them to land. The captain gives small corrections, but nothing serious. The first officer keeps everything steady. Speed is perfect. The descent feels smooth and the runway is lined up dead center. At about 100 feet above the runway, it feels like the landing is already done. But then, all of a sudden, something weird shows up right in front of the windshield. At first, it looks like a dark cloud rising up from the ground. But an experienced eye can identify that those are birds. Not just a few. It's a thick wall of them, lifting straight into the plane's path. And the plane has nowhere to turn or escape in those split seconds. By now, the plane is maybe 7 or 8 seconds from touching down. The captain sees it and reacts instantly. He shouts, "Go around!" Every pilot knows that call. Abort the landing and fly away. But you know what? Sometimes even the right call gets you the worst outcome. A go-around is supposed to save you. Pilots are taught from day one that if a landing does not feel right, they push the power, climb away, and try again. When the captain calls for the go-around, the airplane does exactly what it was designed to do. The system switches into go-around mode instantly. The thrust levers move forward. The engines start working as hard as they can, and they pull in huge amounts of air. At the same time, the flaps start coming back from 40 degrees down to 10. If you were sitting in the cockpit, everything would look calm and normal, like this is just another routine maneuver. But here is the problem. At that exact moment, the plane is flying straight into a massive group of birds. The timing could not have been worse. Just as the engines demand the most air they ever will, the birds slam into the aircraft. Some hit the windshield, some wings, and 86 of them go straight into the engines. And inside the engines, the fan blades tear the birds apart in seconds. But the damage does not stop there. The remains of the birds get pulled deeper inside, right into the heart of the engine. Instead of making power, the engines start to fail. Thrust drops away. The plane should be climbing, getting higher and safer with every second. Instead, it starts losing energy almost immediately, and it is doing this just after leaving the ground. What makes this so hard to accept is that the pilots did everything right. They followed their training, but by doing the correct thing, they turned a bird strike, which probably would have been manageable, into something far more dangerous, because now the engines will not respond. The speed is bleeding away fast, and the plane refuses to climb. Both pilots realize instantly that this is serious. They are only about 100 feet above the ground. At that height, there is no time to analyze systems or read checklists. Pilots have this dark joke. When your engines quit at 100 feet, you are not really flying anymore. You are just a passenger who happens to be sitting in the front with a great view. The captain grabs the controls with both hands. At this point, he is not watching instruments or numbers. He is staring straight at the runway, completely focused. He gently pulls the nose up, just trying to keep the plane in the air for a few extra seconds. But the airplane is working against him, as the speed keeps dropping, and the engines are not giving enough power. Plus, the wings are also slowly losing their ability to stay airborne. And then finally, it happens. The moment every pilot fears more than anything else, the stall. The wings stop producing lift, and the plane slowly starts falling at around 1,000 feet per minute. This is not at all a smooth landing or a controlled glide. It is more like a free fall. And then, the unthinkable happens. The aircraft slams onto the runway roughly halfway down, with the back of the plane hits first, then the left landing gear, and then the right. Immediately, the left gear gives way and collapses. The left engine smashes into the concrete. Metal tears apart and sparks shoot everywhere. The plane is sliding on its belly down the runway. The noise is awful, like metal being dragged across stone. Inside the cabin, people are screaming. In the cockpit, everything is shaking so hard it is difficult to control anything. And then, the pilots realize something even more frightening. Even the runway is running out. There are only about 50 meters left, and after that there is nothing but grass and dirt. At this speed, going off the end would mean the plane breaking apart. It would likely mean fire and people dying, so the pilots do everything they possibly can. They push the brakes with full force, deploy the spoilers, and use whatever little thrust remains from the right engine to slow the aircraft down. Still, the plane fights them the entire way, sliding forward, refusing to stop. The end of the runway is rushing toward them. But before I tell you what happened next, let me tell you a bit about myself. I am a huge aviation fan who spends hours every day studying flight incidents, because I'm deeply passionate about this. So basically, I research them, check the scope of the cases, like how interesting or how terrifying a case is, and then I write each script manually. And the entire process of choosing the case to editing the video easily takes more than a week of effort. So if you like this video, hit like and subscribe. That small support honestly keeps me going. And luckily, somehow, the aircraft stops. It comes to rest with about 50 meters of runway still ahead. Just 50 meters. That's the thin line between life and horrifying death. 15 seconds after everything finally stops sliding and braking, the pilots shut down the engines and immediately start the evacuation. People get out on the runway. Everyone is shaken. Some have small cuts, some are bruised, and a few are in pain. But somehow, no one is seriously hurt. And that feels unreal. Because when you later see the wreckage, it looks horrifying. The landing gear has collapsed. Both engines are destroyed. The body of the plane is twisted and ripped open, especially on the left side, which looks completely torn apart. When you look at the photos, it honestly looks like a crash that should not have had survivors. And yet 172 people walk away from it. Of course, the investigation starts immediately. Italy's Aviation Safety Authority takes over and begins picking through everything. They inspect the wreckage piece by piece, talk to the crew in detail, and even count every single bird strike. The damage is everywhere, not just in one spot. At first it sounds simple. Birds caused the crash. End of story. But investigators never stop there. Their job is not just to say what happened. They want to understand why it happened and what could have been done differently. And that is where things get uncomfortable, because what actually caused the crash was the crew doing exactly what their training told them to do in that moment. And at this point comes the detail that really messes with your head. If the pilots had simply stayed on the approach and continued the landing, the plane would have touched the runway before the engines completely gave up. Yes, the birds would still have hit the engines. That part was unavoidable. But the damage would have been far less serious. The birds would have hit the fan blades at the front, caused noise, vibration, maybe even a scare. But the deeper parts of the engines would likely have stayed safe and made enough power to get the plane on the ground. But that is not what the crew did. They chose to go around, and that single moment changed everything. The investigators clearly say the bird strike alone was not what destroyed the engines. It was the sudden increase in thrust at the worst possible moment. The go-around did not just make things worse, it turned a bad situation into a catastrophic one. If the crew had kept going and landed, it would not have been smooth or comfortable. The landing might have felt heavy, passengers would have been shaken, and maintenance teams would have had a lot of work to do afterward. But the aircraft would have stayed in one piece. But the crash became violent because going around was the worst option. And that is the part that makes pilots pause. If your training tells you to act, and acting causes the crash that almost killed everyone on board, how do you ever know when to trust it again? To decode that, the investigators sit down with the captain and ask, "Why did you decide to go around when the plane was literally seconds away from landing and the runway was right below you?" The captain explains it calmly. He says the aircraft was heavy, more than 61 tons, and a heavy plane needs more runway to stop safely. He was worried the birds could have damaged the landing gear or the brakes, and if that happened, stopping would be even harder. On top of that, there was a tailwind pushing the plane forward, and Ciampino's runway is shorter than what a Boeing 737 usually likes. All of this added up in his head to one fear. What if they could not stop in time and slid off the end of the runway? So to him, a go-around felt like the safe call. It would give them breathing room, time to see how bad the damage really was and check the systems properly. In that way, he would also get time to divert to Fiumicino Airport, where the runway is much longer. In his training, he had learned one clear rule. If you are not confident about a safe landing, you go around. But when investigators look closer, they notice something else going on, and it's called the startle effect. When the captain saw the birds, he did not react in a calm, professional way. He shouted again and again, almost 10 times in just a few seconds. These were not standard cockpit calls. And during the go-around, he moved the flaps from 40 degrees straight to 10 instead of the normal 15. Later, he admits that he never meant to select 10. He did not even realize he had done it. And that tells you a lot. This was not a careful choice, but a shock took over when the brain reacted faster than thinking. In that moment, the captain was startled and did not analyze the situation well. And once investigators realize this, they find something even more disturbing. Neither pilot had ever been trained in the simulator for this exact kind of situation. The investigators immediately pulled out all the training records for both pilots and went through them slowly. And honestly, there was a lot in there. Engine failures, system breakdowns, and all kinds of ugly situations are meant to test how a pilot reacts under stress. But one thing was completely missing. There was nothing about bird strikes during landing. The idea that birds could hit the plane right at the worst moment, just seconds before landing, was simply not part of their training. So, the official report actually spells this out in a very blunt way. It says, the lack of training, especially training that helps pilots deal with sudden shocks during critical moments, played a big role in the crash. If the crew had trained for this exact situation, their reaction could have been totally different. The thing is, aviation does not let mistakes like this go to waste. After the crash, Boeing went back and changed the 737 training manuals. They added a whole section just about bird strikes during approach and landing. The message was clear and very specific. If you are already lined up to land and you can still land safely, do not abort it. Stay on the approach. If there are more birds ahead, fly through them. Keep the engine power as low as you safely can. And if the engines have swallowed debris, only use as much reverse thrust as you absolutely need. So, in a strange way, Boeing ended up telling pilots to do almost the opposite of what the Ryanair crew did that morning. Ryanair also did not just read the accident report, nod their heads and move on. They actually stopped and asked, "What did we miss?" Then they went back and rebuilt their simulator training from scratch. They started looking at other scary moments that had happened close to the ground, like that British Airways 777 that suddenly lost power while coming in to land at Heathrow, or the US Airways flight that ended up in the Hudson River. Different flights, different places, but the same hard lesson every time. When something goes wrong that low to the ground, there is no time to think it through. You cannot sit there weighing options because your body reacts first. And if that reaction is the wrong one, people can get hurt or worse. So Ryanair created 3 new simulator scenarios, and they designed them to catch pilots off guard. In one, birds hit both engines at around 700 feet, right on final approach, and the engines quit. In another, the strike happens just after takeoff at 6,000 feet, and the crew has to glide back toward the airport. In the third, it happens at 3,000 feet, and the only option left is a water landing. But here's the tricky part. The pilots are not warned, and they do not know what is about to happen. In the simulator, they'd see that one moment, everything is normal, and the next moment, the engines are gone, just like real life. This forces them to deal not just with flying the plane, but with that sudden shock of fear, which is actually the instinct to do something immediately, even if that something is the worst possible move. The investigators also zoomed out and looked at the bigger picture. Airports needed better control over bird activity. Pilots needed clearer briefings about places where bird strikes were more likely. And most importantly, the procedures had to change. If birds hit the engines during final approach and the plane is already lined up to land safely, do not try to go around. Keep the power low and land, because pushing the engines can take something already damaged and completely destroy it. So the Ciampino crash ended up changing training and procedures all over the world. And because of that, pilots today make better decisions, and passengers are safer without even knowing why. Ryanair Flight 4102 crashed so others wouldn't have to face the same outcome. But that's exactly the scary part, because somewhere out there another rare situation in another flight is waiting. What if it's also something nobody has trained for yet? What if this becomes another moment where the rule and reality will clash? And what if, this time, people on board aren't really lucky to survive even after a crash? I know it's a terrible and disturbing thought for sure, but also practical. So, share your views in the comments section below. And subscribe to this channel to know more about these types of flight crashes. And if you are also an avid fan of this, don't miss this playlist I have made for you to watch. And until we meet again, fly safe